Have you ever planned something out and just not gone with it at all? Well, welcome to every single TBR I have ever made. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am going to take you through the books that I actually read for Netgalley November this month. Netgalley November is a month-long readathon that was founded by Emma from Emma and Her Books. And basically, as you can understand from the title of it, the whole idea and concept is to go through your Netgalley shelf and clear off as much of it as you can. This year, Emma came to us with some prompts that you can fill out, and I took a look at the 9 prompts that she had given us and tried to fit in a book to every single one of those. I didn't read every single prompt, and I didn't read every single book that I had laid out in the TBR video that I made at the start of this month. But let's see where I actually ended up. The first prompt that I actually did take off was the book that is published this year. For this, I went with The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox instead of what I initially planned to read, which was The Cozy Cottage in Ireland by Julie Kaplan. I cannot tell you how much I fell in love with The Holiday Swap right from the minute I picked it up. It is kind of a cross between Bake Off and The Princess Switch, the Netflix movie that stars Vanessa Hudgens, and Vanessa Hudgens. This book follows twin sisters Charlie and Cass. Charlie is working as a presenter for a really popular baking show, and Cass is still behind in the town where they grew up, and she is now in charge of their family bakery. Charlie has an accident on set, gets a concussion, and she is written off work for a couple of weeks. Because things are really starting to heat up in her career, she's online for a big promotion. She decides that she cannot let this opportunity happen. She absolutely has to keep going to work. So she calls Cass and they decide to switch lives. I love a twin story basically because of that premise. So when I found out that that was a part of this book, I was all over it. The book does have some really, really cute scenes that you would expect from a book that's set in a bakery, that's set with baking shows, that's set all around food and baking, that kind of thing. But there are also 2 very sweet romances featuring a friend of Cass's who is now starting to date Charlie but doesn't know that it's Charlie. And also a medical assistant who is starting to date Cass but doesn't know that it's Charlie. If this book came as a Hallmark Christmas movie, I would absolutely watch all of it. And it is set in the run up to Christmas, and there are some kind of Christmassy scenes, but it doesn't really read like a big Christmas romance novel. So if you're not looking for a Christmas romance that's just going to throw tinsel and Christmas lights into your face, this is a really great one that you should go for. One thing that I will point out, and it's something that just irritates me about books that feature a lot of food, I wish there had been a lot of recipes at the back of the book, especially because quite a big part of the book is the family sourdough starter. And I really wish they had given us some tips on how to make your own sourdough starter or how to make sourdough bread or things like that that would have absolutely added just to the end of the book. But all that left aside, this is one of the best books that I've read this month. The next prompt that I did take off was Your Oldest Approval. And for this one, I picked up Act Your Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the 3rd book in the Brown Sister trilogy. And I will admit, I've had this one on my Netgalley TBR since maybe February or March of this year. But the main reason that I just did not pick it up is that I did not want to say goodbye to these 3 sisters. I have fallen completely and utterly in love with them. I reread Get a Life, Chloe Brown in June of this year. First read Take a Hint, Danny Brown in maybe July or August. And I knew that this was a series that I was going to absolutely love, cherish, recommend to everybody who likes reading romance. And I am absolutely so excited to see where Talia Hibbert goes next, but also know that I have loads of her books that I can catch up onto. This one follows Eve Brown, who is the youngest of the 3 Brown sisters. She's a little bit more spoiled than her 2 sisters are. She's still living at home with her parents. She's still very much living on the family trust fund. But at the start of the book, her father and mother sit her down and tell her that that has now been cut off. She is on her own. She has to go out and make her own fortune in the world like her 2 sisters are doing. Eve then goes to a job interview at a hotel where Jacob is the head chef. Interview doesn't really go very well. Jacob doesn't really like her, but the other guy at the interview table is completely in love with her. When Eve is leaving the parking lot, she accidentally runs over Jacob and breaks his arm. So he is reluctantly left with no choice but to hire her as a chef at the hotel. And things get a little bit chaotic from there. Eve is not exactly a great cook, she's not exactly a great employee, but she really does give it all of the enthusiasm that she can. For me, this book was the perfect end to one of my favourite series. There's so much flirty banter between Eve and Jacob. There's kind of trepidation of starting anything between the two of them. The steamy scenes, as I have come to expect from Talia Hibbert, were phenomenally written. And I absolutely love Eve as a character. I think she's one of my favourite characters that I've read this year. She is definitely my favourite of the Brown sisters. She's very flighty. She's very headstrong. She's a little bit kind of naive as to what the world is really like for people who aren't in the position that she's in. But I absolutely loved her. In this book, as well as in the other books, the recommendation here is absolutely phenomenally done. Jacob suffers with anxiety, and Eve herself is black and she is a plus size character, and all of these were written so well. None of it was ever done gratuitously. I absolutely loved this one. I am just so bereft that A, I left it for so long because of my own stubbornness, and B, that the series is over. The next prompt I did was a book that begins with the letter N, and for this one I went with No Words by Meg Cabot. This is the third book in a series set in the Little Bridge Island off the coast of Florida, but I wouldn't necessarily say that you need to have read the first two to actually read this one. Mainly because I have only read the first one and this one and never really felt out of place because I hadn't read the second. You follow here Jo and Will. Jo is a children's fiction writer and she writes a book about a talking cat that is super popular with like teenage readers, young readers, maybe readers from like 9 to 12, 13 years old. And Will is much more of a contemporary writer, and they don't really gel from the minute that they've met each other. They've actually met each other previously to an event that they are both taking part in Little Bridge. And it turns out that Will is actually not just one of the founders of the event, but he's hosting it at the moment, and a lot of it is going to be hosted at his house. There's a lot of tension between Will and Jo, and because of this, when a romance eventually started to blossom between the two of them, I found it really difficult to get on board with it. Maybe I'm just not a big lover of hate to love or enemies to lovers, but this one was much harder for me to get on board than any other one that I've read before. Something else that I didn't really love here is quite a lot of the language that Jo uses. Because she writes for a young audience and because the cat character that she writes is so ingrained into her own personality, a lot of the words that she uses or a lot of the sentences and phrases that she uses are actually puns, cat-based puns. And I like a pun. I'm a big fan of a pun. But this was a little bit too over the top for me. It turned out to be like every second sentence was a pun, and it got a little bit too grating. The story of this book feels a little bit like Beach Reads by Emily Henry, and I absolutely adored that book. So I would have really loved to see something that was like that again here, where the two characters kind of swap manuscripts or swap ideas, things like that. But it just fell a little bit flat for me, and this wasn't particularly a highlight from my November reading. For the latest approval, I wanted to read Nobody Panic by Tessa Coates and Stevie Martin. This is based on their podcast of the same name, where they give you kind of adulting advice like how to make your rented house feel more like a home, how to start a savings account, how to be a good wedding guest. I absolutely love their podcast. It's my absolute must-do Tuesday morning listening. I sit down for work, turn my laptop on, and put on Nobody Panic so that I can get my start into the day. However, there was a slight issue with the copy that I got. Every single page had just the words proof copy emblazoned on it in huge, maybe like 72-point writing. And unfortunately, that got so grating by maybe about 2% into the book that I just went, I cannot read the copy that I've been given. I have gotten in touch with the publishers, Hodder and Stoughton, and I've asked them if there's any way I can get another copy of it because it's a book I have really wanted to read since I found out about it. As of yet, they haven't gotten back to me, but if I do get my hands on a finished copy, I am absolutely going to read that one. Next was a book with a green cover, and for this I went with / am going with The Intimacy Experiment by Rosie Dannon. This follows Naomi, who is one of the side characters in the previous book, The Roommate, and Ethan, who is a rabbi at a local synagogue where she lives. The book follows them trying to set up a kind of seminar for young people to come in and learn about intimacy, sexuality, relationships, all of that. As I'm filming this video, it's Sunday the 28th of November. I've just started this book today, and the reason I am including it in this video is because I know I am going to finish it by the time that Tuesday the 30th rolls around. So we will officially then have said that I have ticked off that prompt. The next prompt that I ticked off was debut author. And I love when you find a book by a debut author that doesn't necessarily feel like a debut. It's really well written, it's clearly well planned out, it's clearly well researched. That is exactly what I found in The Arctic Curry Club by Dani Red. This book was so well written. And also something that I really loved about it is that it portrayed anxiety issues so phenomenally well. As somebody who has suffered from anxiety for a really long time, I know what the signs look like, I know what the symptoms are, I know what things can happen in your mind when you're going through a spell of anxiety. And this was all written down and portrayed so realistically in this book. I really have to commend Dani for that. You follow Maya, who has moved to the Arctic Circle with her boyfriend, who is a scientific researcher and is doing quite a lot of research in the area. She's really finding it difficult to adapt. The days are getting really short. Ryan, her boyfriend, has absolutely settled into a great routine of going to work, going out with friends, going to the gym, getting out and doing things, whereas she isn't really settling in as well as she would have hoped. To make her feel a little bit more like home, and also to connect her with her mother, who is Indian but has passed away when Maya was 7, Maya decides to cook some curries that she can remember from a book that her mother used to have. And the thing that happens is, when Maya starts eating these curries, she is transported back to times in her life that she didn't know before, that she had completely forgotten, and that she is opening up these repressed memories that she had. I thought that this fantastical magical realism element was done really, really well, and it kept me guessing the whole time. I never had any idea what was going on. There's also some scenes where Maya's father has taken a new partner, there's a wedding, and we're getting to see how Maya is kind of adjusting to this new change in her life when she's not really a big fan of change overall. Two things that I will point out that I didn't love about this book, two of them are kind of more personal preferences than anything else. One is that I don't love reading about characters who smoke. I'm not a smoker myself, and it's not something that kind of turns me on to a book. But if you are, or if that's something that you enjoy reading about, this is a character who does portray that. And like I'd already said with the holiday swap, when a book features food so heavily, I just want to have some recipes at the back of the book that I can try out. A recipe for a korma, or a jalfrezi, or a biryani, or something that I can take into my kitchen and say, I tried this out from a book that I've read and I absolutely fell in love with it. All of that said though, this is a book that I really did genuinely enjoy, and I am so excited to see what Dani Red's next work is going to be. The final prompt that I picked off was the most anticipated book of the year. For me, there was no other option but On a Night Like This by Lindsay Kelk, and I was solely rewarded for having waited out. I think this might be one of Lindsay's best books yet, but I think I say that about every other book, so that only genuinely means that Lindsay is getting better as she continues writing. You're following Fran, who is kind of stuck in a limbo at the moment. She and her boyfriend are not really on great terms. She's looking for a new career, but it's not going very well. And he's kind of subtly telling her that she should be doing the career that he has in mind for her in his own town that she's not really settling into very well. Fran used to work as a PA or an assistant for quite a few people, and she is called up one day by an agent who asks her to be the personal assistant for one of the world's biggest pop stars, who's going to be performing at the Glitter Ball in a couple of days' time, but basically needs kind of like a half an assistant and a half a babysitter. Fran is then swept off to a yacht off the coast of Italy, and we see some phenomenal geography being put out there. But also, because things start to kind of go a little bit pear-shaped, Fran ends up at the ball herself. This is kind of like a modernized Cinderella retelling. And something that I really enjoyed about this book is that while there is a romantic element here, and there is a romantic character interested in Fran, that's not the biggest point of the book. A lot of the book is about Fran discovering that she's not really happy with her life as it is and going about changing it. And her relationship and her friendship with Juliet, the girl that she's taking care of. And Fran rediscovering herself after having been in such a traumatic relationship for a few years. I absolutely adored this book, and I really loved reading about Fran as a main character. She and I kind of seem to have the same kind of struggles, same kind of anxieties, the same kind of questions in our minds that I had when I was reading this book, and that absolutely connected me to her like no other character I read. So those are the books that managed to come off my Netgalley shelf in November. My score now stands at a relatively healthy 71%, and that does kind of look en route for what I wanted to do in 2021, which was bring the score all the way back up to 80. I might make it, might not make it. Let's check in at the end of the year and see if I actually do. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.